Maybe it's a knight protecting his lady, or a warrior rescuing the princess. Perhaps it's a prince risking kingdom and crown for the love of a woman, or a cowboy guarding the stagecoach, carrying the woman he can't live without. Whatever the plot, Once Upon a Historical Romance interviews authors who tell stories of love throughout history, travel through time, and fall in love over and over again with Once Upon a Historical Romance.
Welcome to the first episode of Once Upon a Historical Romance, where each episode we get a chance to talk to authors who write historical romance. And for myself, I am your host, Parker J. Cole. I am a historical romance novelist. However, I have just recently joined the Harlequin Historical Romance family. I'm so excited for this new venture in my writing career. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a chance to talk to other authors who write in the line, as well as other historical romance authors. So each episode, you're going to be introduced to a new author you may or may not know, get updates on their newest release, and we'll have fun just traveling back in time. Today, my brave soul that's with me, her name is Terri Brisbin, and she is the author of the upcoming release called Her Highlander for One Night. It's coming in September 2022. Can't wait to tell you about it in just a few moments. My Harlequin release is called The Duke's Defiant Cinderella. It takes place in France pre-revolution. So it's in the great grandeur of the ancient regime, as it was called. And so you have decadence and opulence. You have visitations with Marie Antoinette. There's a lot going on here. And with this particular book, it was so fun to reimagine characters in an interesting light, to kind of put the modern spin on old things. It was just really, really fun. I want to thank my editor, Carly, for all her help in getting that book together. So I hope you get a copy of The Duke's Defiant Cinderella, available on September 27th, 2022. And so I'm going to introduce Terri Brisbin with us today. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Award-winning USA Today best-selling author Terri Brisbin is a mom, a wife, a Grammy, and a dental hygienist who lives in southern New Jersey. Since 1998, she sold more than 3 million copies of her historical, paranormal romance novels and novellas in more than 25 countries and 20 languages around the world. Her current and upcoming historical and paranormal fantasy romances will be published by Dragonblade, Harlequin Historicals, and Oliver Heber Books too. Visit Terri at terribrisbin.com for more information about Terri, her works, and upcoming events. Doesn't it sound exciting? I cannot wait to have a CV like this. So Terri, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Parker. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Excited to have you. You were one of the first people to really welcome me into the Harlequin Historicals family. And you have so much insight into what this industry calls for as a historical romance author. But I got to know, how did that journey start for you?
I've always been a writer of something, although it was a lot less exciting when I was writing in dental hygiene and professional journals and things. But my fiction writing really started after years and years of reading historical romances. And I found, back in the dark ages of computers, the Prodigy internet service, where I found other readers and writers. And I realized I had some ideas. So I started taking workshops and met up with other writers in New Jersey. And they were tremendous, tremendous help. So eventually I pitched my first book, which was wonderfully rejected by all who saw it. And then I ended up pitching my second book at a conference. And it was a time travel. And eventually, a year and a half later, that sold to Berkeley. So I did my first 4 books with Berkeley before I was accepted by Harlequin.
I would love to know the story of your Harlequin, The Call. And anyone who wants to write for Harlequin, Harlequin is so kind enough to let us tell each other about what it was like to get the call. So tell us about that.
At that time, I literally was at a dental hygiene conference, And in the middle of it, got a phone call from my agent. And I'd had a new series of books, which was strictly historical, no paranormal, no time travel. And we were really focusing on Harlequin. The historical line was one of the top 4 global lines at the time in stores in America, all over. And that was definitely a place I wanted to be. And so my agent called and I excused myself from this meeting and went into a little side room to take the phone call. And she called and said that my editor, the person who would be my editor, Melissa Enlick, had called with an offer. And I forgot for a moment where I was, and I just started screaming. And we talked a few details. I told her I would have to call her back. And when I opened the door to go back into the meeting, everyone was just staring at me. And they knew I was a writer, and they knew I had submitted to Harlequin. I had told them. And I got the biggest round of applause. And it was just so exciting, really, cherry on the cake. It was really lovely.
I definitely understand what it is like to get the call. And I don't know how many times I'll possibly tell my own Harlequin the call story. But when I got the call, I blanked out because Carly contacted me. And I blanked out to where I was talking about the manuscript to talking about cooking. There was no segue. There was no segue at all. And poor Carly, she's looking at me with the most extraordinary expression on her face. And so I'm like, I have to reel this in now. I just blacked out. It was just blank, And you're so excited. I said, well, I'm so excited to be doing that. And when I hung up the phone, I think I screamed. 'Cause I didn't want to scream in front of her, right? You don't want these people to think you're a nut job, So.
And yet I've talked to so many editors since then, and they describe it as the best part of their day, their week, their month, when they can call, especially a brand new author, and make that call. So it goes both ways. It really does.
I think the reason why it happens is because you're fulfilling a dream to have your work out there with a particular body.
Yes. And this industry, this profession of writing, you put so much of your personal self out there and it's rejected. I lost track of how many rejections I had before I sold my first book and even before I signed with Harlequin. And it is very soul smashing. And so that acceptance that finally that someone sees your work, your product, your dream, and is going to go with you on that journey is really just amazing.
And so I want to talk about that journey now because your newest release is coming out in September and it's called Her Highlander for One Night. And this book, I definitely enjoyed. I had the honor of reading an ARC and I love this book. I love the book because it's a twist on a common trope in romance, but there's a sense of modernity in there. But you also see that these two people were trying to make the best of a bad situation. And there's so much going on in here. And I learned a lot every time you read a romance, you tend to learn things about stuff you didn't know. And so that's what this book is going to give us. So I want to go ahead and read the blurb for you guys out there. So I am going to now read the blurb for Her Highlander for One Night. And this is book 7 of her series, A Highland Feuding, a sexy Highlander story from USA Today bestselling author Terri Brisbin, of course, claiming the warrior for one night of pleasure. When Glynnis had to make a noble marriage, Iain Mackenzie Cameron's illegitimacy stood in the way. She married another, but now she's returned to the clan a widow, and Iain is an assured warrior, the chieftain's heir. Glynnis would make him a more than suitable bride, except for her inability to produce heirs. Iain must marry elsewhere, but only after she claims one precious, impassioned night with him. From Harlequin Historical, Your Escape to the Past. What I love about this blurb, Terri, it is so on point, and yet it doesn't quite capture the journey of Glynnis and Iain. So let's go ahead and just peel back the veil a little bit about our main characters. What is Glynnis like? If you were to meet her, let's say at the dental hygienist's office, what would you think as soon as you saw her?
Miss Perfect. Miss Gracious, Miss everything is done the way that it should be done. She's kind. She's learned what she needs to do in life, and she will be perfect at it.
If you were to, I hate to say this because now I'm in a role here, but if you were looking at her teeth, would her teeth be perfect too? Like
absolutely, absolutely. Considering it's medieval Scotland and the diet wasn't that great and all that stuff. Yes, she is. She's the perfect lady. In the previous book, previous to this, which these do stand alone in terms of storytelling, we meet her and she is the guide or the model on which the hero's mother wants his fiance to learn and act and be. So she is Miss Perfect.
One thing I like about her being Miss Perfect is that Miss Perfect comes with a lot of consequences. And what are some of those consequences?
Well, one of the consequences, and especially at that time, she was a perfect lady, but she was a nobleman's daughter. And so the expectations were she would toe the line. She would marry where she was told. She would marry for alliances. She would marry for property, title, wealth, and especially heirs to keep that. And so it really gave her no room to be the person that she wanted to be. And so when she sees the chance, she then realizes how constricted she is to this role.
And you have to kind of feel some sympathy for women of the past because they were restricted by certain expectations, whether they were poor or whether they were wealthy. Now, in this case with Glynnis, she knows what her duty is. But when the book first opens, she's having a really intimate discussion with Iain. So if Iain came into the dental hygienist's office, what would he be like?
He's a young man. He's in his early to mid 20s. He has gained over these last, not at the time when we meet him. At the time, I should say that, at the time we meet him in the very opening, he's kind of at the end of his teenage years. He's just starting to really grow into his fullness, into his strength. He has some choices to make and he's not quite certain. So he doesn't have the self-confidence yet, and he still has dreams.
But he's almost a little bit naive because he just wants Glynnis to give up everything and run off into the sunset, basically. And Glynnis, she has that strong desire, but I admire her because she puts duty before her own personal ambitions. Why do you think that is an important part? Even today in the modern world, sometimes you have to put duty before personal ambitions. Why do you think that's something that we should not necessarily throw away to the side?
Well, I think especially if you look at historical cultures, if you look around the world, duty and honor and name were critical. And I think that was because survivability depended on those things, depended on everyone carrying out their part, knowing what their place was, doing it and doing it well, and that everyone would survive if we all did that. And so I think duty and honor and loyalty and name go just back into our DNA. And so I think as we've become more modern, it's become more individualistic and there's a lot more ebb and flow. But I think that stories like these really call back to those old intrinsic characteristics that are critical to humans.
I think you make a good point to that because it is more individualistic today. But if they didn't do their duty back then, will we have the same type of thing we have now? So that's why we have to think about it. If everybody were doing their own thing all the time, what about the family? What about the country? What about the world?
Yes, yes. And I should point out too, anytime you're reading historical fiction, it is a modern view of the past. And so at times, I think writers make it more black and white. We really focus on those characteristics we need, those tropes we need, those manners we need to make our story clearer. So you have to realize, and I know you do because you do the research as well, that life was a lot messier than just the black and white that we think of as everybody doing their part and all that. But we hone in on those things because those are kind of, as I said, intrinsic to human nature. And so easy to understand those kinds of roles and in the past.
And I like the fact with Glynnis and Iain, we have a situation where because of her rejection, he is forced to say, either I'm going to stay in this place of pain or I am going to move on. And I like how historical romance does a great job of showing this, particularly in this particular book, Her Highlander for One Night. Iain is being forced to become someone so he could become worthy of her, because she is doing what she's supposed to do. She's Miss Perfect. She's a good girl. She's doing what she's supposed to do, but she cannot do it with him.
Yes, exactly. And his struggle, he's a character who has, I think this is the third book that Iain has appeared in. And in terms of his background, he should have been heir to the clan. His father was the heir, and he died before Iain was born and after, but he didn't know about Iain because his father had manipulated it so badly. And so it has been made very clear to him what he could have done. And he has kind of pushed it away and said, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to do what I want to do. And now it's brought right in his face with Glynnis that that's the cost he pays, is of not getting to what he should have had. And it forces him, yes, to that decision.
But he's such a dashing hero, Iain is. He's very driven, and he becomes the man that he seeks to become. But I like how you show us it takes hard work to be who you want to be. And so that comes up a little bit later in the story. But now, and it's not quite a spoiler because it happens really early. When Iain sees Glynnis again, it's been several years, he's not sure if he even sees her because she's been changed drastically. One thing that some readers have talked about is having more realism in our fiction. And I thought you did a phenomenal job adding grief to here. And that struck a chord in me as I was reading about her grief. And there's a scene in here where she's overwhelmed by grief, but she's still living. She's moving, but she's not quite aware of what's going on. And then all of a sudden, she looks up and she's like, whose clothes are these? Because she was sewing something. And she looks up and she goes, whose clothes are these? And for me, I don't know why that just struck a really huge chord in me. But she came out of a fog from her grief. And even though we like the fantasy of happily ever after, that road is littered with rocks, okay? That will cut your feet. And so when you were adding that particular element to the story, were you thinking, I want to show not just happily ever after with no problems, but she's not the same woman she was when she first wanted to be with Iain, and he's not the same person either. They've both experienced grief of some sort.
Yes. And I think, and I've spoken about this before, the last 5 years of my life have been littered with grief, as you said it. And I've really kind of used the process of grief in fiction is sometimes just too light. It doesn't show the actual life-changingness of it. And I wanted to take this woman who has literally lost everything after having such high hopes and being the perfect person and woman she was supposed to be. And she lost it all. And I hate to say it this way, and I know writers will laugh, readers may understand this. I didn't want her to have it too easy, because if the path back was, oh, okay, I'm great, this is good, let's move on, it wouldn't have drawn Iain's concern. It wouldn't have been anything to her except a glitch in the matrix. And people, characters too, don't grow and change unless they're challenged. And so I wanted it to be not terribly dark, but that we see the process that life does move on and that grief doesn't go away, grief changes and we change with it. And so I wanted that all to be part of the authenticity of the characters.
Exactly. I agree with you there, because when we just started connecting this year, so you may not have known, but my grandmother passed away in November of 2021. And that was life altering. You know what I mean? Like life altered. Okay.
Yes. And we all try to say that we're going to be ready. And, some of the loss I've had was very expected. We knew it was coming. And I thought we're all prepared for it. And grief just hit in so many different ways. And so I thought even back then, even though all these different things might have been different, grief still hits us. And when it does, it takes us off at the knees. And we need to decide to either fight through it or accept it and move. And so that was important. And yes, I did know about Granny. And
oh, yeah, that was my old lady. I always called her my old lady. But it's funny because people who like to criticize romance in general, and you read those comments, okay?
Yes. I've had those comments.
Oh, yes. And you're sitting there going, do you have any idea what's in a romance? Do you really think it's all about sensuality? Do you really think that? So you have to let people know the sensuality is part of the story. You're not just walking organs, it's part of the story. And I like that in this particular book, one of the things, because you do have a lovely, just beautiful love scene with Glynnis and Iain, but that actually is a pivotal moment in their relationship. I won't go into how, because I really want you to pick up your copy of Her Highlander for One Night, available on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold, and particularly at the Harlequin store, harlequin.com or millsandboons.com. You can get your copy of Her Highlander for One Night. But I was thinking how pivotal all these things interacted with their journey. And then for Iain, he now has become worthy of her. And now he can't have her. And it was just like, oh, now he understands.
It's be careful what you wish for kind of moment, because he has worked for years to get to this point. And it means accepting his duty, accepting all the things that she had accepted before. But the night that they spend together is, to me, yes, it's a lovely, sensual scene. But to me, I wrote that scene as Glynnis's final empowerment, that she does something for herself that she knows is probably not the best thing, the smartest thing, but that she knows she wants and she's going to do it. And it's her final act of independence before she has to turn around and go back into duty and honor and loyalty. And so it was pivotal.
Yeah, it is pivotal. I remember when I wrote my thoughts back to you when I was reading the book, I thought about, it was just so lovely because you see her breaking the mode of doing something for herself. She has done everything for everyone else. She's done what she's supposed to do. And yet here she is still unable to do something for herself. And so when she and Iain have their night together, it's pivotal. It's like, it's one of these moments where you go, wow. And I understood that completely. I understood that completely. And Iain's just a perfect lover. He just comes off just beautiful. Everything about him is beautiful. And Glynnis is just this wonderful woman who accepts that. And then she also takes control of that. Just a lot going on, And I love the fact that her story is Her Highlander for One Night. It really is aptly titled, because just for one night, he becomes hers and she can do what she wants to do. And I can't think of how women throughout the ages have had to sacrifice love for someone else. And so when they take that by the hands, they take it, because you may never get it again. And I understand that sentiment. So that's why I absolutely adored Her Highlander for One Night. And so, Terri, before we go, what are some other plans that you have in store for this particular series, or are you working on something else?
Well, as I had planned out this series, which is called A Highland Feuding, it was based on a 300-year feud between the Camerons and the Mackintoshes. And the first couple of books focused on the Mackintoshes, and then the last couple of books focused on the Camerons. And I thought that this was going to be the last book until it took the turns that it took, and it was clear that it didn't end the way that the plan needs it to end. And so I was surprised by the very last scene when the other woman in Iain's life kind of took over and showed me what the next book is. So,
and I hated the fact that I liked her. I hated that I liked her.
I liked her a lot.
I hated that I liked her. I said, where did she come from? And then she's nice. I said, why are you nice? I wanted you to be the typical evil villain and she's not. And then the way you ended that book, I could have strangled you, Terri. I could have strangled you.
I had not planned it because Ellen was supposed to be a very minor character, just kind of, and then she came in as a fully formed person with this tantalizing backstory that she still won't tell me the answers to. And so I definitely see that her story will be told. But most immediately, I'm working on a new Regency, Edinburgh set Regency series called The Unexpected Heirs of Scotland. Just literally today, finishing up the first book called The Lady Takes It All. And it's kind of this series, it's 3 books. The heroes are all my crushes. So, yes. So I'm using people that I've had massive crushes on as the heroes of the books. They'll be set in, like I said, 1815 in Edinburgh rather than London. And it was a completely different culture. So I'm really enjoying writing these. And they will come out sometime in the next year, I think, all 3 of them. And my real book of my heart, I had written a series that sadly the publisher closed the line before I could write the final book. And Oliver Heber Books is reissuing the first 3. And I'm going to finally be able to write the 4th book in my fantasy series, Warriors of the Stone Circles. So lots going on.
Terri, I want to thank you so much for being with me on our inaugural episode of Once Upon a Historical Romance. And for our listeners, you have no idea what went on behind the scenes of this particular episode, and I'm not going to tell you. The fact is that she helped me do this show. And Terri, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to be here with me today. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Parker, and welcome to the Harlequin family. And I look forward to reading your book as well.
Thank you so much, Terri. And for our listeners out there, thank you for joining us for this episode of Once Upon a Historical Romance, where each episode we explore a new book, a new topic related to historical romance from ancient times to probably up to the 1950s. I'm a little leery about the 1950s because some of our guests were born in 1950. And that's not historical, is it?
No, I can assure you it is not historical.
It is not historical. But apparently they wanted to increase the historical era, Terri. So as we get this show together, get our flow together, I hope you'll join me along for the ride. Make sure you follow all the links below this link here about Terri's books, her website, where you can go buy her newest release coming up, and everything else below the link in the comment section here. Thank you so much for joining me for Once Upon a Historical Romance.